Good morning, everyone, and welcome to day 2 of the US-Mexico Summit. For those of you who were here yesterday, you know we had a very energizing day with some very strong panels. We had some very critical leaders from the United States and Mexico who shared some important thoughts yesterday. I think today will be equally, if not more, inspiring. And we have some good panels today here in El Paso, and then we'll conclude the day in Ciudad Juarez. Again, thank you very much. My name is Bob Moore. I'm the editor of the El Paso Times, and I have the pleasure of being the master of ceremonies at this event and introducing our key speakers. This morning, we're very fortunate to have a sponsor of this event, and their help is very much appreciated. Michael Comunez is a native of Las Cruces, and he's currently president and CEO of Manat Jones Global Strategies, which is one of our sponsors. He's also a former assistant secretary of commerce in the Obama administration. And as you know, one of our speakers today is the current Secretary of Commerce. So his presence here is very welcome. And I'd like to invite Mr. Comunez to come up and give a few words.
Thank you very much, Bob. Good morning. Buenos dias. It is really wonderful to be back home in this region. As Bob mentioned, I was born in Las Cruces. My father was born here in El Paso. My sister was born here. My mother is buried in Santa Teresa. This is a region and a valley that has enormous personal significance to me, and one that I've carried in my heart ever since I lived and grew up here and left to attend high school in California when my mother had a very important medical procedure at UCLA. So I'm always happy to be home, and I'm especially happy to have the privilege to be a sponsor through Manat Jones, our firm, of this important conference. It's something we do with great pleasure and pride to support the effort, and in support of Congressman O'Rourke, and also our client, the Borderplex Alliance, Rolando Pablos, and his team are doing phenomenal work to promote this region as a source of thriving economic growth. I want to thank, before anything, the Congressman for his leadership in bringing this summit together. I can't tell you enough, and I'm going to actually say a couple of words very briefly about the importance of this conference to the broader bilateral agenda between the United States and Mexico. But you don't see many members of Congress organizing these types of events, and it's no small feat to get it done. And it brings tremendous visibility and stature to the border communities, not just El Paso, but the border region as a whole. And so, Congressman, thank you for your leadership. It's really very much appreciated across the border region. And Dr. Natalicia, thank you for hosting us once again at this wonderful institution that you've been leading for so many years with such distinction. So I promised to keep my remarks very, very brief, and I will do so. But I wanted to try to offer a perspective on this conference and the deliberations that are happening here, the conversation which has been so rich, and try to put it in the context of a broader agenda, and also try to help you understand the importance of what you're doing here as it relates to the broader strategic agenda between the United States and Mexico. As Bob mentioned, I had the privilege of serving in the Obama administration for 5 years. I began as special counsel to President Obama at the White House, and then was asked to go lead the trade policy effort at the Department of Commerce, where I served for 3 years. And when I got there, one of the things that struck me as I was thinking about the nature of our bilateral relationships across the globe, with China, with Indonesia, with Turkey, with Brazil, with India, with Russia, with all of our major trading partners, the European Union, it struck me how absent from mind Mexico was in the dialogue in trade circles, in commercial circles, in political circles in Washington. When I returned to the White House for the first time as Assistant Secretary, I had attended a meeting at the National Security Staff in the Situation Room with the National Security Advisor and a bunch of other people to debrief on President Calderon's state visit to Mexico, to the United States. And as I looked around the room, and I've told this anecdote many times, I noticed that about 95% of the people sitting around the table in the Situation Room were security and law enforcement related, drug enforcement agencies, CIA, Joint Chiefs of Staff, CBP, all focused, or the green shirts, not the blue shirts, all focused on the security, and the central topics that seemed to predominate since 9/11 were how to lock down and secure the border. And trade and commerce seemed an afterthought. And frankly, the holistic relationship with Mexico as a strategic partner seemed not even to be on the agenda. So I was very privileged to have the opportunity to try to right that ship, and I began sort of an insurgency campaign within the administration that ultimately led to proposing to the White House when President Peña Nieto was elected that we take advantage of the 20th anniversary of NAFTA and this new president in Mexico to change the narrative and to change our focus on the relationship with Mexico and to launch a new strategic dialogue with Mexico called the High-Level Economic Dialogue. And the whole purpose of the HLED, which you're going to hear Secretary Pritzker and Secretary Ildefonso Guajardo talk about, was to elevate the relationship to a strategic level and to have our two nations come together at the highest levels with the president and the cabinets on both sides talking about issues of common interest. Because until then, I mean, since the passage of NAFTA, we really hadn't had those dialogues. And so I was very privileged to travel with President Obama to launch that HLED in Mexico City in April of 2013. And it's really taken root and taken fire since. And it really has now become the primary mechanism by which our two nations address and deliberate issues of common interest and strategic importance to both countries. Now, why do I bring that up? For a few reasons. First of all, when we put that agenda together, the idea was, as I mentioned, to elevate issues of common interest to both countries to a strategic level. And frankly, the plan was always to include issues of concern at the border. We created a flexible platform that was focused on issues of competitiveness, connectivity, productivity and economic growth, innovation, and entrepreneurship. All of those issues are at the heart of what happens at the border every single day. So I want to leave you with three very specific thoughts and ideas about how this border conference needs to link up and should link up with that broader agenda. And I'd encourage you to think about how you can bring these issues to the secretaries and in an effort to try to get the agenda, the border agenda, on the binational agenda of the HLED. First of all, I think what's important, it's been said yesterday that the border is not well understood. There's a distinctive ecosystem here in the border region, an economic ecosystem, a cultural ecosystem that is not well understood in Washington, that offers both of our nations the chance to promote and explore innovation, collaboration. Our countries come together in a seam here at the border in a very unique way, and we all know, I'm not going to lecture to you, you all know it because you live it every day, how interactive and dynamic this region is, and how the border can be a place of innovation and collaboration between our countries. And yet that is not well understood. The border as a driver of economic growth, productivity, and innovation is not well understood in Washington, and that has to change. So the first thing I'd encourage you to do is to think about how the lessons that are being learned in this conference can be taken to that higher platform, and ask yourselves, what can our federal leaders in Washington and Mexico City do to promote and incentivize and encourage that kind of collaboration, that kind of innovation, that kind of synergy that happens uniquely at the border. Second, I want to encourage you to think about yourselves as part of an ecosystem that extends from San Diego and Tijuana all the way down, all the way across the border through El Paso and Juarez, and continuing down to Laredo and Brownsville and Matamoros and all of the border communities to the south. Every community is different undoubtedly, but there's a common set of needs that all border communities face, and I think there's a need for horizontal integration, and I hope that you all will think about how to catalyze what's happening here and link it up with similar conferences that are taking place in San Diego and other parts of the border region. And third, I hope that you will take advantage of the Secretary's visit today to remind them that when we do think about the border is more than just physical infrastructure. The one thing that I will say that it concerns me about our binational agenda as it relates to the border is that to the extent the border community's concerns are taken into account, they tend to be focused on physical points of entry. And while that's important, no doubt, we have to have strong and secure borders, and we have to have functioning ports of entry. There is so much more to the ecosystem. There's so much more that our border communities can offer that has to be taken into account. Educational collaboration and exchanges, looking at cross-border collaboration for joint development, joint enterprises, using the border as a laboratory for how we foster collaboration between our two countries, I think is very important. So our leaders need to understand that the border is more than ports of entry. And I hope that out of their visit today, they'll come away with an understanding and that through the kinds of discussions and collaborations that are happening today, you'll be able to influence that agenda. So let me just close by saying there is new energy in the relationship between the United States and Mexico today. There's a new attention at the highest levels of our governments. There's real commitment on both sides that I think will survive multiple administrations to collaborate, to partner as strategic partners in the world, to make North America one of the most competitive regions on the planet. But the border communities are at the heart of that agenda. To date, they're only understood, I think, largely through the lens of physical infrastructure. And I encourage all of you here in this conference to take the message to Washington and to Mexico City, and I know Congressman O'Rourke is doing that the border communities are much more than that. And there's an important role for us to play in contributing to influencing the design and the leadership of our binational agenda. So with that, let me just say es un gustazo estar con ustedes. Me encantaría y siempre y cada vez que tengo la oportunidad de estar en esta región, pues me da tanto gusto y gracias por la oportunidad de estar con ustedes. Muy buenos días y que tengan una conferencia con mucho éxito. With that, it's my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Natalicia, who's previously been introduced substantively, but let me just say that I can't think of a more distinguished educator and leader. UTEP, as they say, judge us by the fruits of our labor. Look around this beautiful campus, look at the amazing track record this institution has, and I think it's largely attributable to the great leadership that Dr. Natalicia has shown. So Dr. Natalicia, please welcome to the podium.
Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for being with us today. We thank you again, Mr. Camuñas, for the sponsorship and for your remarks, which actually lay a nice foundation for what I intend to say. We're, of course, very, very grateful to Congressman Beto O'Rourke for his partnership in offering this summit. You're much taller than I am. And we are especially pleased that you come to UTEP on a Friday because on Friday we all tried to wear something orange. So maybe you'll all go to the bookstore and buy yourselves a T-shirt or something like that. We're extremely pleased and honored that later today we're going to be joined by U.S. Secretary of Commerce, the Honorable Penny Pritzker, and Mexico's Secretary of the Economy, the Honorable Ildefonso Guajardo Villarreal. Their participation will greatly enrich today's conversations. I also want to thank again all of our panelists and moderators for leading the discussions. Yesterday's provocative conversations on the development of the border region as a strategic economic asset for an integrated North America laid additional groundwork for the kind of bilateral collaboration that will advance our efforts toward achieving shared prosperity and quality of life. UTEP has long recognized and embraced our border location as an ideal setting to pursue our mission of access and excellence. We place the human and economic development and the quality of life of the Paso del Norte region at the very center of our teaching, research, and service. In fact, the steadfast pursuit of our mission has positioned UTEP at the forefront of higher education's changing paradigm, and our successful history of partnering with colleagues at sister universities and organizations in Ciudad Juárez and other locations across Mexico has helped build our reputation as a model 21st century research university. The special roles that we and other institutions of higher education located on or near the U.S.-Mexico border can play in fostering economic development and enhancing quality of life for regional residents are increasingly important in the larger global community as well. In our case, UTEP's sharp focus on academic and research programs that intentionally and specifically reflect our location has led to outcomes that are absolutely integral to the success and competitiveness of our region and the greater North American economy. Today, UTEP is the only doctoral research university in the United States where the majority of the students can trace their roots to Mexico. 80% of our more than 23,000 students are Mexican American, and UTEP enrolls more Mexican national students than any other United States university. I hope that most of you are aware that UTEP has been recognized by Washington Monthly Magazine as one of the top 10 national research universities in the United States, and with our 21st century student demographic profile, we are ranked #1 for promoting student social mobility. These rankings not only reflect UTEP's success in driving regional competitiveness, they also point to the synergies that result when a research university like UTEP is fully engaged with the productive matrix of the larger society. Of course, UTEP is proud to play a role in workforce preparedness, flexibility, education training, and increased productivity for the residents of our region. But I'd like to highlight another dimension of our impact on the larger society that merits greater public awareness. As a major research university with more than $84 million in annual research expenditures, we provide the broader community with high-level access to research expertise, interdisciplinary knowledge, technologies, facilities, and data that support regional economic growth and enhance quality of life. As I mentioned yesterday, this 2015 summit is a continuation of UTEP's tradition of hosting binational conferences of strategic importance, including the annual border security conferences over the past decade, as well as the 2014 FOBESI working group on the special potential of the border. What's important, too, is that UTEP's engagement in the work of strengthening such binational cooperation has a long history. In 1991, for example, we were honored to host a meeting of then U.S. and Mexican Secretaries of Education, Lamar Alexander and Manuel Bartlett, who led large delegations of educators from both nations to begin exploring strategies to build a stronger binational foundation for the achievement of our shared educational aspirations, a goal that UTEP has sought to achieve regionally really since our founding 100 years ago. As we continue our conversations on such important issues as trade, healthcare, innovation, infrastructure, economic and regulatory policy, manufacturing, engineering, energy, and stewardship of the environment, the work underway at UTEP and other higher education institutions located along this border will add important dimensions to them. To illustrate this point and perhaps catalyze further discussions during the summit, let me offer just a couple of examples. At a number of recent conferences whose focus was on national security and defense, we've highlighted UTEP's leadership in intelligence and defense systems research. UTEP's commitment to this critical research and related academic programs is well known, and our national reputation is well deserved. Our programs in security studies continually evolve to keep pace with new technologies and new issues. At this summit, our lens has been widened well beyond security considerations to a range of other issues in areas of UTEP's expertise and impact. Among our many regionally relevant research initiatives, I'll mention the Border Region Modeling Project, which is known for its Borderplex econometrics forecasting model, and its technical report research series that investigates Borderplex policy and development issues. UTEP is also home to the Center for Transportation Infrastructure Systems, the only research center in the United States designated as both a national and a regional transportation center. The center conducts research to promote the safe, efficient, and environmentally sound movement of goods and people, something we all recognize as critical to our borderland economy. Also extremely important for our shared well-being is research conducted through UTEP Center for Inland Desalination Systems, or SIDS. The center focuses on the science and technology of water desalination and innovative water treatment, while engaged with local, regional, state, federal, and international agencies to make maximum utilization of groundwater. It also enhances commercialization of brackish water desalination technology and educates students by providing hands-on experience in advanced water purification technologies, all high priority 21st century concerns. A relatively new and especially exciting development is the establishment on our campus of the Hunt Institute for Global Competitiveness, an important regional, state, national, and international resource. It is our nation's first freestanding, sustained initiative to analyze transboundary regions from an economic perspective. And you heard yesterday from Patrick Schaefer, the director of the Hunt Institute. Finally, I'll mention UTEP's Border Biomedical Research Center. Through collaborative efforts with nearby institutions, this center has become the focal point of pathobiology research that addresses the biomedical and health issues of the bicultural population of the El Paso Ciudad Juarez region. As impressive as they are, these examples are but a sampling of the critically important work that's underway on this campus, and I invite you to take time to learn more about the many other initiatives which directly contribute to this region's capacity for a healthy and productive environment, for innovation and global competitiveness. Greater public awareness of the outcomes already achieved in this region through binational collaborations offers significant potential to help generate increased and sustained public support on both sides of the border for the broad attainment of our shared goals. And I think this is very much Mr. Camuñez's point. Again, I'd like to extend a very warm welcome to each and every one of you to our campus. We're delighted that you're here. We hope that, like us, you've come to regard the University of Texas at El Paso as a key driver of innovation, expertise, workforce preparedness, and productivity across a broad range of disciplines and at all levels of our highly interconnected binational region. It's my great pleasure now to introduce a strong ally and a supporter of the University of Texas at El Paso, the Honorable Beto O'Rourke, a distinguished member of the U.S. House of Representatives representing the 16th District of Texas, which of course includes El Paso County. Congressman O'Rourke is a fourth-generation El Pasoan who, prior to his congressional service, served 2 terms on El Paso City Council. He has a deep knowledge and appreciation for this region's capacity to compete successfully on a global level and to emerge as a leading center for continuous innovation and value creation in a 21st century knowledge-based economy. Please join me in welcoming Congressman Beto O'Rourke. I'm going to go out this side.
Good morning, and thank you all for being here, especially those of you who've traveled great distances to be here, whether it's from Los Angeles, Washington, D.C., Mexico City. We noted yesterday that we have mayors from at least 10 different border communities, from El Paso, Juarez, Las Cruces, from Nogales, from Laredo, and points further out and in between. I think that's probably in no small part thanks to the leadership of our former Mayor John Cook, who is the CEO of the Border Mayors Conference. Former Mayor Cook, thank you for joining us today and for your leadership on U.S.-Mexico issues and for bringing all these great mayors to El Paso and to Juarez today. I really want to thank President Natalicio for her work. She's incredibly humble, but she and her team helped to design this program. This is their conference, which we get to be a part of. You've heard from her, from Michael, and if you live in El Paso, the transformative effect UTEP as an institution and President Natalicio as a leader have had. I see it each and every day in my office with the many UTEP grads who work for me. So, Dr. Natalicio, thank you for your leadership. Michael, I know that you are doing well in the private sector, and we know that because you helped underwrite today's program. But given your comments comments, I'd really love to see you back in public service because you have it absolutely right in terms of what the relationship should be between our two countries. So thank you for your comments. And Bob Moore, I mentioned yesterday, he's a 2013 National Press Foundation Editor of the Year. But more importantly, for those of us in El Paso, he's really forced us to face some of the very difficult challenges that we have in this community. He has constantly reminded us at the same time of our opportunities. And while not always a comfortable position for me, he holds those of us in positions of public trust accountable. And so he's doing a great job as an editor and a leader in this community. Bob, thanks for taking part in this conference as well. Appreciate your leadership. I'll be brief, but I'll tell you what we were trying to do when we designed the programs for yesterday at UTEP, today at UTEP, and then later on in Ciudad Juarez. We want to help decide who will define the U.S.-Mexico relationship. And for me, it's obvious that El Paso and Juarez, the largest true binational community in the world, where you have 3 million people in southern New Mexico, West Texas, and northern Chihuahua who speak the same two languages, are bicultural, are binational, who can understand the hemisphere from tip to tip, unlike any other two communities. This should be where these conversations and dialogues and solutions take place. And it's incredibly important that we have people like the CBP Commissioner, Gil Kurlikowski, who was with us yesterday, who's in charge of all Border Patrol agents and CBP officers, those who facilitate the trade and commerce and travel between our countries and also keep us safe. It's really important to have Secretary Guajardo from Mexico City, Secretary Pritzker from Washington, D.C. We need to listen to them. But just as important that we have Fernando Garcia here from El Paso, that we have Ruben Garcia here from El Paso, that we have Alfredo Corchado. You talk about rock stars that we have minted in this community. There's Bobby Fuller, there's Cedric Bixler Zavala, there's Jim Ward. Alfredo Corchado on the U.S.-Mexico relationship is somebody that is being talked about all over the continent. And so we're incredibly lucky that he's from here, represents this community, knows it so well. And when we attract others from around the country, including the journalists who've come to cover this summit, that they're hearing the voices from our community who know and understand and have lived it, as Michael said, better than anybody else. And I am confident that that meeting of those who are responsible for the relationship, these cabinet-level secretaries, and those who live the relationship, the people of El Paso, Juarez, Nogales, Ciudad Juarez, Matamoros, Brownsville, that meeting of minds, of expertise, experience, of responsibility is going to produce great results. And it won't all happen this year and today, but in continuation of what President Natalicio has started with these annual conferences and what we will do in the future, I'm confident we will get there. And I'll close by saying that in our ultimate ideal of what this summit becomes, we'll have great panelists, amazing experts, wonderful dialogues in sessions like these. But we'll also have more events like the International 10K Run that takes place at 7:30 tomorrow, starting in Segundo Barrio, going through downtown El Paso, coming over the Stanton Street Bridge, past the Customs House in Juarez, where in 1909 we had our first U.S.-Mexico summit between Taft and Diaz, past the Bull Ring, past the Cathedral, stop for a drink at the Kentucky Club, and then finish at the international boundary on the Paso del Norte Bridge. We want to do more like that. We want to have music, culture, food, athletics, sports, the full experience of what life on the border is, what life when the United States and Mexico connect as they do in El Paso, Juarez. So I hope that you will take advantage of these opportunities this weekend to include the world's largest classic film festival. The Plaza Film Series is going on. Go see a movie tonight if you don't have plans, and come back and join us next year. Thank you for being here, though, today, and for making this summit a success. Thank you.
Thank you, Beto. And if it's all right with you, I'll just meet you at the Kentucky Club. I'd like to go ahead and invite our next panel to come up to the stage. One of the big successes we had yesterday was using Twitter to help further this conversation. You see our hashtag up there on the screen, USMXS. So we invite you, if you're on Twitter, to go ahead and share your thoughts as we hear from the panelists today, and also to submit your questions. If you have questions that you'd like any of our panelists to address, go ahead and submit them, and I'll forward them to our moderators. That worked really well yesterday, a great conversation, and our hashtag USMXS became a trending topic on Twitter yesterday for a while, so that was great to see. So Alfredo, if you and your group will come up, and I'll do some brief introductions. Those of you who were here yesterday know that we spent a lot of time talking about the economy, talking about public policy, which is all very important. This next panel, though, is really, I think, where the rubber meets the road. This is where we hear about the impact on people. And those abstract economic and policy discussions we had yesterday become very real. This is also, if I may, for me, our panel of heroes. I'm not going to do deep introductions on everybody, but you have bios of each of the speakers in your packet, and I would encourage you to read those bios. There are some really remarkable people up here who are doing yeoman work, not only for our community, but for our two nations and for the world. So I'm very pleased to be able to introduce them to you. First, I'll start, try to, on your right and work our way down. Begin with Dr. Eva Moya, who's an assistant professor in the Department of Social Work at UTEP. We have with us Ruben Garcia, who's the founder and director of Annunciation House. We have Fernando Garcia, who's the executive director for the Border Network for Human Rights. And we have Maria Guadalupe Davila Perez, who's president of Jaguares Jóvenes de Bien. And then, as Beto indicated, we're very pleased today to have my colleague, Alfredo Corchado, the Mexico bureau chief for the Dallas Morning News, who will lead this conversation. And with that, Alfredo, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for waking up so early on a Friday. I did get the memo, Dr. Natalicio, and I got the orange, but I'm still planning to go to the bookstore. I think I would, I just want to make a quick clarification because I think my parents would be really, really disappointed, something Beto O'Rourke said. I consider the El Paso Juarez home, but I was actually born in Durango, la tierra de Durango, tierra del Alacrán. And I do want to thank Beto O'Rourke for expanding the scope of this summit at such a critical time for both countries, especially for Mexico. I just arrived last night from Mexico City, where the journalism community remains angry and shocked at the killing of photojournalist Rubén Espinosa and 4 women in the middle-class neighborhood of La Colonia Narvarte, and the subsequent overall chilling effect on freedom of the press. The killing came a week ago today, 2 days after I and others had testified before the U.S. Congress in Washington on the importance of a free press in the Americas, especially Mexico, which is today the most dangerous country in the hemisphere to be a reporter. Every day we walk in the shadow of more than 100,000 people killed or disappear. Among them, by some estimates, 120 journalists. Every 26 hours, according to Artículo 19, an NGO set up to protect journalists, a Mexican journalist is attacked. I would be remiss if I didn't take this opportunity this morning to again urge policymakers from both countries and everyone here to continue pushing from inside and outside of Mexico the importance for a free press needed to shine the light on corruption and hold the powerful accountable along the way. To strengthen Mexico's fleshling weak democracy, weak institutions, I think it's critical for both sides of the border. I'm also proud to represent the Dallas Morning News, and I bring it up because it touches on the themes of this summit. But a year ago, the Morning News embarked on a project called The New Border, which is an ongoing effort to look at issues that have long impacted the 2,000-mile border, but today so increasingly influence North Texas. In other words, the border has moved into the interior of the United States, and issues whether the culture, economic, trade, human rights, health, immigration, or security are issues that you can't walk away from anymore, no matter the distance. These are the issues that we will be discussing this morning with our distinguished panelists. Bob has introduced them, and I think their bios are online, so I won't take up more time get into that. But I'll bring up some of the topics for Ruben, Fernando, Lupita, and Eva. Let's just try to have a dialogue and try to make it proactive, solution-oriented, because this is an opportunity for our panelists to present some of the problems of the border to policymakers for takeaways. And let's start, Fernando, Ruben, Eva, with the hot-button issues. It's a presidential season, campaign season, or as we know it here on the border, it's Mexico bashing time. People are pouring, according to candidates, people are pouring across the border. More walls are needed to keep the rapists, the murderers out. And in Mexico, el presidente Peña Nieto y el gobierno dicen que hay una narrativa nueva, que los homicidios han bajado, que la economía está mejorando, que el pasado se debe olvidar y seguir hacia adelante. Ruben, what do you think the biggest myth is about the border?
Well, I think one of the biggest myths would be that Donald Trump has it right. I think that what is missing, and I see this on a daily basis because we continue to receive families on a daily basis that are being released by ICE and are coming to our houses of hospitality. One of the biggest myths is the belief that somehow the people, the immigrant who arrives, who is present, is or does not have some kind of legitimate claim in our society. I think that as I listen to people speak about the border, the greatest emphasis is on security. How do we keep the border? And that has become a politically driven theme. And everybody who wants to say anything about the border starts off by giving lip service to yes, there's human beings, but we understand we have to secure the border. And we say that irrespective of the fact that the relationship between the immigrant and people in the United States is a relationship that has great history, it has great legitimacy. It is a relationship that is defined by tremendous consumption of drugs and the flow of money that has devastating effect on populations south of the border. We've seen what has happened in Mexico over the past 10 years and what is now happening in El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, and that we are connected to that, and it gives people a legitimate right to sit at the table. We never get to the conversation about what is it that gets said at the table because we're so interested in talking about the importance of securing the border. And in fact, our resources, our time, our strategizing is almost invariably always about security. And so one of the myths that drives this to an incredible extent is that the border is not secure, that we are somehow in danger by the phenomena of an interrelationship between us and people south of the border. And I dare say, I'm not even sure that many people can define what do we mean by securing the border, short of let's shut the border down, let's just wall ourselves off, even though we all know that that is totally categorically not viable.
But I mean, how secure is the border? I mean, from what I understand, there is zero migration from Mexico these days. Maybe Fernando, you want to take a shot at that? Is it zero migration from Mexico, or are we seeing an increasing number of people coming across?
Well, will never be zero migration from Mexico. I think that is a fact. That's a fact in the past, today, and in the future. What you mean is that if less people is coming from Mexico, it might be. It is potentially related not only to the economic crisis in the United States, but also to the enforcement apparatus at the border. But I would like to go back for a minute to the question about the myth, and I think it is related about precisely how do we perceive ourselves and how do we perceive the border. I think there are in multiple conferences. Well, let me backtrack and say that I would like to recognize the members of our community that are here from the Border Network for Human Rights. They are actually the ones that I do represent, and I believe they might be doing a better job than me explaining the situation on the border. So thank you for being here. Gracias por estar aquí, compañeros. I think that it is important to understand that we've been talking about the border in a vacuum. I mean, not only Trump, which actually I believe we are very disgusted and very upset about the way that not only Trump, but I think what he represents, I think is larger than Trump, this perception that Mexicans are rapists, criminals.
I mean, even Governor Rick Perry said yesterday that if elected, he would secure the border.
Of course, and I believe that even Democrats might say that. I think it is a good wage issue to actually get more votes. But to the point that I wanted to go is that if we're talking about the border has the place of the future, has the place where we want to integrate, I think we are not recognizing the largest myth. And the largest myth is that the border, the way that it is right now, represents a big obstacle to integration, specifically because of what we have done with it, because of this rhetoric that the border, it is full of criminals, that borders is out of control and mayhem. It has failed to recognize how much has been done already along the border in the last 15 years. I mean, there are multiple numbers. I mean, we can talk about 700 miles of fencing. We can talk about 20,000 Border Patrol agents stationed along the border. We can talk about drones and technology. So the border never been so militarized.
And we have more than 23 federal agencies, no?
We had all of the agencies that you can imagine interacting at the border. So I think the major myth to integration is that we are not integrating ourselves. I mean, we're putting more walls between El Paso and Juarez, between the United States and Mexico, because we believe that this border should be treated differently to the rest of the country. So I think we need to have a discussion on why, at the end of the day, we decide to criminalize immigrants, families, kids, in responding to that with more militarization, if that is going to be the way that we're going to lead to the future. I mean, is this what America is about? If this is what we want to have for America in 50 years, we want America that would militarize borders and regions, that would criminalize minorities. We want America that actually is willing to recognize that everybody has a part in the development of this country.
Dr. Moya, health often gets lost in the discussion about the border, and yet there are many long-term consequences for residents. What's missing in the discussion?
I think that I want to go back to sort of like the definition of borders, which are demarcations. They're líneas psicológicas, demográficas, geográficas, that at the end of the day also mark history. And so for us, I think that the U.S.-Mexico border, as had been said by the congressman, we're the most dynamic border in the world. And so therefore we must understand that we are a reflection of what is happening outside of the U.S.-Mexico border region. So the border is not specific to the geography in which we live. So for those of us that have been brought, raised, gone to school, have commuted, have done practicums, have done research, we are the best of the U.S.-Mexico border region. And I think that that's part of the narrative that usually gets lost. Now, health. Health is a beautiful conversation because in health, for the most part, we don't fight over what needs to get done. We just don't invest adequately. And so therefore, we tend to relegate and put it to the side, and it's a lot easier to think in terms of diseases. But I think that health has demonstrated that the U.S.-Mexico border region is a region where people come together despite the lack of resources, and we tried our very best to figure out ways to work around health issues that are the most relevant and the most pressing. Because it's been said, you know, diseases know no borders. They carry no passports. They don't know which way is north, south, east, and west. They travel at will. They care very little about homeland security rules of both countries. And at the end of the day, they impact, they infect, they can kill. And so in health, I think we have a long history of how the civil society has been able to come together by pressuring, con todo respeto, you know, and by using the diplomacy of health to get at the role of counties, states, and governments to do what needs to get done. How we deal with issues such as tuberculosis, HIV, immunizations are good examples of how we're able to come together to do the things that need to be done. Now, is it an important common good? Is it part of the agenda? Is it part of the political conversations and the dialogues? No. What you basically hear on health is, okay, so what are we going to do to get more of the industry of the healthcare system? How are we going to help each other, you know, sort of like contact and access the pharmaceuticals? Are we going to talk about health insurance coverage that can be sort of like done and validated in both countries? And when that conversation takes precedence over the people's health, then I'm worried, because then we concentrate on what is a tangible economic good. And we really do a disservice in understanding what health is. I was here 5 years ago as a recent doctoral student in a panel. And the conversation was about healthcare and the industry of healthcare. And I was very respectful to the colleagues and said, you know what, I cannot speak about the industry. I can only make comments about health. So I'm sort of like thinking 5 years into this conference, what have we done differently? And I'm beginning to see greater conversations about human security, but that's the kind of conversation that I think I want our members of Congress and Senate and our academicians and our researchers, our activists, the private and the public sector to have a conversation on. So when we speak of securing the U.S.-Mexico border and the countries, then we speak about the human security involved, of which health, food, human rights, protection, empowerment, the environment, the access to quality education and employment are integral parts of what health means. So I think we're on the right track, but we need to really elevate the discourse and then be congruent with the research, the policy, and the investment that needs to be done, and tackle the areas in which we can make the most good. And we already know that because there's wonderful science and research that has been done on what are the areas of health, that if we can do better now, early on across the lifespan, we can have excellent health outcomes. And this region could be a region that distinguishes itself for not only being resilient and being strong, but also being the healthiest, because we have what it takes to actually improve the health conditions of both countries.
Just wanted to say something about Lupita before I introduce her, before I ask her a question. Lupita Davila is an extraordinary story. I met her in 2010 following the massacre of Villa Salvarca in Ciudad Juárez, where fueron 15, ¿verdad? 15 people were killed, most of the young students, among them her son, Rodrigo. And Lupita has since then risen to prominence. I think that was a key moment. It was a turning point, not only for Juárez, for Villa Salvarca, but for Mexico in general. And since then, she's been able to help thousands of students, of young people, to try to keep them away from gangs, from violence, etc. Lupita, the sense in Mexico, or at least the narrative that the government tries to give of the country, of the image of the country, is that it's a country that, yes, was hurting from the past but is making significant gains. That the homicides are down, that the country in general is better, the economy is getting better, the many, I think 12, 13 reforms were passed. La realidad de México hoy es un mito. ¿Dónde está México hoy? ¿Dónde está la sociedad civil? ¿Dónde está Ciudad Juárez?
Bueno, antes que nada, buenos días a todos. Gracias por esta maravillosa oportunidad que a una servidora le dan, sobre todo para dar a conocer el trabajo que se está realizando y lo mucho que hay por hacer. ¿Cuál es la realidad ahorita en nuestra ciudad? Desafortunadamente tenemos una generación de niños que vivieron una violencia intensa, jóvenes que perdieron y niños que perdieron en aquel entonces a su padre, a su madre, a toda su familia en muchas ocasiones. Realmente necesitamos seguir con esa participación de la sociedad civil, del gobierno de ambas partes de la frontera. Para una servidora ha sido un poco complicado en el 2011 el poder conseguir recurso para poder salir adelante con la asociación civil. Se tocaron muchas puertas. Gracias, Alfredo, porque usted fue parte de esas puertas que se pudieron abrir. ¿Cómo estamos ahorita? ¿Hemos mejorado? Sí, puesto que somos una sociedad que nos levantamos de las cenizas, nos levantamos del dolor para decir ya basta, nos levantamos del dolor para decir podemos trabajar, pero aún hay mucho trabajo por hacer. Los jóvenes y los niños necesitan ayuda, son el futuro de ambas fronteras, son el futuro de ambas sociedades. Necesitamos estar de la mano para que realmente esto se pueda llevar a cabo. El trabajo que se está realizando a través de nuestra asociación civil es a través de talleres de prevención de violencia, de prevención de adicciones, de activación física a través de diferentes deportes, el fútbol americano, que era algo que a mi hijo Rodrigo le gustaba. Esto no pudiera haber sido posible si no fuera por nuestro head coach Fernando Gallegos, por sus hijos, por el equipo de fútbol americano y por todos los jóvenes que hemos estado preparando para que vayan a replicar el programa de Jaguares Jóvenes de Bien. Aún hay mucho trabajo por hacer, Alfredo. Nos hemos encontrado problemáticas bastante fuertes de violencia intrafamiliar, muy fuertes. El acoso escolar es bastante difícil en las escuelas. Afortunadamente con nuestros talleres que llevamos a cabo, esto ha estado cambiando. Lo que sí nos dimos cuenta, hay un gran índice de abuso sexual infantil en las escuelas. ¿Por qué? Desafortunadamente hay mucha desintegración familiar. Bueno, pues este es el trabajo que tiene que hacer la sociedad civil. Es realmente un trabajo duro, un trabajo difícil. Obviamente es importante que las puertas de los gobiernos de ambas fronteras se abran para la sociedad civil, porque somos nosotros los que tenemos que tomar en nuestras manos la acción para que realmente los niños y los jóvenes puedan salir adelante de esa situación. Si no hacemos algo, si no seguimos trabajando con ellos, recordemos que son jóvenes que perdieron sensibilidad al ver una situación de violencia. Entonces tenemos que hacerlos tener ese sentido de pertenencia, el decir esta es mi comunidad, esto es lo que estoy haciendo por mi comunidad, y que ellos a su vez lo repliquen. Para mí también es muy importante, Alfredo, el que la comunidad universitaria de ambas partes de la frontera hagan ese servicio social, pero realmente el servicio social, el que si yo soy activador físico, ingeniero, abogado, vaya a los centros comunitarios y les diga a los jóvenes, es posible levantarse de una situación de dolor y yo te voy a ayudar. ¿Cómo? Pues bueno, enseñándote lo que yo sé. No nada más ir a hacer el servicio social a algunas comunidades, estar un tiempo ahí y se acabó. O sea, realmente hay que tener ese sentido de pertenencia en ambos lados de la frontera.
I just want to remind people to send your questions at hashtag USMXS, and I don't know if you guys want to give your hashtags to include you in the questions. If you are, Fernando's saying no. Lupita, ¿tiene algún hashtag para que no? Nadie.
Do we have a hashtag?
Alfredo, we don't have them.
Okay.
I think we don't have hashtags.
No hashtags. Mine is AJ Corchado, at AJ Corchado. But maybe this is a good segue to talk about solutions. Fernando, Lupita talked about the lack of funding, and in full disclosure, in 2013 I had a book come out, Midnight in Mexico, and one of the things that people would ask during the book tour was, how can we help? And as a reporter, you're caught in a very uncomfortable situation because, I mean, how do you tell people this is how you help? Eventually, I talked to the El Paso Community Foundation, and they set up a fund called Somos, meaning Somos Ciudad Juárez, Somos El Paso, and it was an effort to try to help young people in Mexico who were impacted by the violence, to try to offer them or help them with scholarships either to UTEP Community College or Ciudad Juárez. But that's part of what Lupita has said, that there has to be much more funding, much more help to try to provide light at the end of the tunnel for young people in Juárez. Fernando, what do you see is funding, or maybe we'll start with Ruben, more funding, is that the solution? I mean, you had the surge of Central Americans coming last year, many of them families, many children. How much funding did you get? Do you need more funding for that? Is that the solution?
Look, obviously funding is a tremendous factor in this discussion across the board. I think that perhaps more important is that when we speak of all the different structures that are involved in the border relationship, to what extent is there the requirement that all of those structures can articulate their connection to the human dimension that is involved? When we speak about how we can make the border operate more efficiently, more effectively, how the semi-trailer trucks can cross over, can be, and of course the emphasis on security, security, security. The importance of the amount of time that we spend on how semi-trailer trucks can come across and how little time is spent looking at what happens to the human beings that are continually caught in all of the relationships. I find it very interesting that I get phone calls from ICE letting me know that we're going to send 16 people in the next 2 hours to you. We're going to send 15 people. We're going to release 18 people. And the word that gets used isn't people. They're not going to release families. I get told by one of the ICE officers, we're releasing 15 bodies. Today we're going to send 12 bodies. And it just really stays with me, the mindset. So we speak about security. Yesterday we had a woman that arrived with 4 small children. The very first thing that she said when she arrived, and she was from Michoacan, is they separated my 18-year-old daughter, my 19-year-old son, and my husband, and they have locked them up. I'm asking all of the secretaries who come to this conference, all the elected officials who come to this conference, I'm asking you to explain to me, what do I say to this mother? What do I say to this mother? And the conversation gets caught in security, security, security. So, yes, funding is an integral part of how people are responded to and how they are allowed to come to the table. But there's so much more about the different structures' inability to really look at the human beings that are there. I also think that in that same sense, that as we put emphasis on what we do on the U.S. side, we have to remember that if the United States became less enamored with security, and more focused on what it means to try and create a democracy, a democratic environment, that in that same sense, those values need to cross the border going south. You started us off by mentioning Rubén Espinosa. In that same sense, that the border and the security keeps people out, it is also keeping out a lot of the values of democracy, freedom of the press, securing the rights of individuals, due process. The legal system, it's not crossing into Mexico. And
how do you do that?
Needs to cross. Well, I think that as long as we're going to keep building the border to keep everything from coming in, we're also going to keep some of the truly important human rights aspects from also permeating south of the border. I'm continually saying to people that when I speak to groups, I ask people in the U.S., if you're going to go to bed at night, it's 2 o'clock, you've gone to sleep, you've turned the lights off, and you hear a noise. And you wake up and you realize someone is breaking into my house. What's the first thing we do? We take out our cell and we call 911. I go to Juarez, I go to Mexico, and I speak to groups and I ask the same question and people laugh. The last people you're going to call are the police. So this is real. This is real. When the emphasis is totally on how do the semi-trailer trucks get across, and that's the end of it. We have this woman from Michoacan who arrives. What do we say to her? And how equipped are we to say, if this is who we are as a country, then there has to be a way for her and her family to come to the table.
Just to continue the conversation with the theme that Rubén brought up, Lupita, ¿qué tan importante es tener no solamente solidaridad de Estados Unidos, pero más ayuda de norteamericanos en poder endurecer la sociedad civil? Y antes de que conteste, hay una pregunta que acaba de llegar. Is there a risk? A ver, no, espérate. How to make sure that civil society has equal voice in shaping a new border narrative, not just business and political interests. That's from Bob Moore, I think. From somebody else. Okay. ¿Qué tan importante es la participación de Estados Unidos en poder ayudar la sociedad civil en que México sea un país mucho más democrático?
Yo creo que definitivamente es de suma importancia el que la sociedad de Estados Unidos se involucre y se ha involucrado, porque realmente la ayuda, y a nosotros nos sucedió, gracias a un reportaje que usted nos hizo, llegó equipo de fútbol americano nuevo para nuestro equipo. Nunca habíamos tenido cascos nuevos en el equipo de fútbol americano. Esa ayuda fue una bendición. Realmente la sociedad civil estadounidense está comprometida, Alfredo. Realmente hay ese lazo con nuestra comunidad, con los latinos, con el simple hecho de tener amor por los demás. Entonces es de suma importancia el apoyo que ustedes hagan llegar a la sociedad civil comprometida para que realmente haya ese cambio. Realmente Estados Unidos y las asociaciones civiles y las personas que aún no pertenecen a una asociación civil sí marcan la diferencia, y es importante que siga habiendo esa ayuda, porque al final de cuentas somos un solo corazón, somos somos una frontera, sí, nos separa un río, pero al final de cuentas somos uno solo. Sí, dependemos uno del otro. Entonces, definitivamente el que participe y la participación de la economía, para nosotros, y el apoyo económico definitivamente es de suma importancia.
Fernando, what do you see as part of the solution? I know you've done a lot of training across the country, training volunteers. The Border Patrol is incident-free first of all, explain what incident-free means, and then talk about is that part of the solution?
It is, and there are several layers of the potential solution, and I will get to that in a minute. I would like to say first that that in these discussions, and as we actually progress in defining a new narrative of the border, it is important to recognize there are things that we see, there are things that we don't see, and there are things that we don't want to see. Or we don't want to say. Hay cosas que no vemos y que no queremos decir también. One of the things that we don't say and we don't want to see sometimes is that our border policy, especially our security policy at the border, it is embedded with racism and xenophobia. And this is a historic fact. The way that this border was developed, it is being very charged with this negative, harsh enforcement against Mexicans, but also at the end of the day against immigrants coming through this border, because we don't do the same with the border in Canada. So I think if we fail to recognize that reality, there's going to be many Trumps. There will be many more Trumps from both parties that will continue to see the border the way that they are seeing it. I think it is important in terms of the solution, in terms of the new border narrative, is to recognize that the border is just not a line in the desert, but there's human beings, there are economic development, there are aspirations and hope at the in the border and at the border. So if that represents the future, I think we need to emphasize that the new narrative should recognize what Ruben has been saying, the humanity of this process, the humanity of the border. And I also would say that part of the solution also, in terms of the macro terms, it is on what Mexico does. I mean, yes, Mexico should be offended about building a wall, but also Mexico should be very, very, I would say, I'm not going to say Mexico, but I think the Mexican state should be able to resolve the bottom problem, the root problem of migration. I think we need to create conditions in Mexico, labor conditions, economic conditions, housing, healthcare, education, for Mexicanos, for Mexicans, and also for Central Americans.
Are you talking about raising the minimum wage?
I'm talking about transformation of Mexico, because when we go and do these trainings and education processes within our communities, most of them immigrants, I ask this question: how many of you would be back in Mexico if you had the right condition to develop as human beings? Everybody would raise their hands. So I think we need to recognize that that is the reality and that is part of the solution. But let's talk about briefly in terms of border enforcement. As I say, it's been charged with racism. We had been quantifying the enforcement in the amount of things that we put at the border, without accountability, no oversight, no clear direction, no practical, measurable goals on how we are going to accomplish some of the goals on the border. So I think for us, for Border Network, I think it's very important to recognize that we need to have a new, there's a paradigm, and we need to have a new narrative that actually be focused on an enforcement and security enforcement at the border that goes from quantity to quality. And what that means is that we need to recognize that the only way that this border is going to represent the border of the future is when the security and the national goals, the national security goals are paired with economic development goals and human rights goals. And for that, I think it's important to engage border communities in the discussion. I think all of the policies and strategies, they are being developed in Washington. And there is no discussion with the border stakeholders, with communities engaging in develop that policy. And I believe that's where Congressman O'Rourke and Congressman Pierce, actually they are leading the way, because they are about to reintroduce what is being called the Border Enforcement Accountability and Community Engagement Act. It is a legislation that for the first time calls for accountability of the border infrastructure, but also calls for the immersion and participation of border communities in shaping border policy. And finally, I think I need to recognize also the progress that we had in El Paso. In El Paso, in New Mexico, southern New Mexico, I think we had shown the rest of the border in the nation is that we can have a border patrol that can be functional while at the same time engaging with communities at the multiple level. I think.
How do you do that?
I'm very proud to say that in the 17 years of engagement between Border Network and the Border Patrol in this region, we successfully been able to reduce incidents of abuse. I think we're talking about 10 years ago, 70% of potential mistreatment was coming from Border Patrol vis-a-vis other agencies. And now I think there's a major shift, and where there are concerns about DPS, some local police departments, ICE, ports of entry, but I think there's been an unprecedented engagement with Border Patrol where there's been cross-training between communities and Border Patrol. There are being joint community forums. The Border Patrol region in El Paso, New Mexico sector is the only one that has the non-uniform, unarmed community relation liaison.
I mean, how did you do that? I mean, how did you do that?
That was part of a strategy where communities got organized. I mean, that was a long process of getting people educated and organized, building community structures that actually will make pressure, but also be able to have a dialogue with Border Patrol. I think that is being very key in the process. And I think now I believe that at least in El Paso sector, Border Patrol is more accountable to our community, and that is due to the organizing processes that we have developed.
Dr. Mike, what are the solutions on the health front?
You know, I want to take us beyond health, because I'm sitting here saying the role of civil society, that's what brings us here, and that's everything that happens between familias and gobiernos. And that's, in my opinion, where really the transformation and the beauty of the region that we live in lies. So what we really want to look at is what is the role that we have beyond familias and gobiernos. And I want to highlight examples of things that are working, not only in the area of health, because health, let us be clear, it's everything that impacts and has been discussed in this panel and beyond, and much more than medical care. I want to highlight 6 things that I can say are responding to
briefly
immediate needs. Ventanilla de salud. Look at what can be done within Consulados Generales de Mexico and the spaces that are safe for connationals, for familias, and for residents to be truly informed, educated about their human rights, their civil rights, about access to services on both sides of the border. Doable, possible, 84 community partners from both countries coming together to serve hundreds of individuals at no cost in this community, done in partnership with the university and community-based organizations. Look at what this community in Ciudad Juárez and the Paso del Norte region are doing around human trafficking. We haven't really talked about the trafficking, the slavery that is happening along the U.S.-Mexico border. It's a violation of human rights. Look at how we're coming together despite our differences to actually raise consciousness about the pathway of human trafficking and slavery through community-based organizations, universities, academicians, researchers, scholars, and activists in the areas of how do we mitigate the impacts associated with human trafficking. Look at the research. I think in the research arena, more can be said and done so that we can continue to plan and do research that is truly meaningful and relevant, and therefore we can pull the resources from both countries and the international community to be tackling, documenting, and having the data that is going to help us to make the case, convince the policy decision makers, influence the media, and therefore influence the policy. Look at the role of community health workers and how this community has benefited tremendously from the experience of Mexico and the training of promotores and promotoras around human rights, around health issues.
I have a question from the audience that ties into what you're saying. How can the business, government, and community leaders in the summit better engage young people in civil society?
Oh, maravilloso. O sea, yo creo que la clave aquí es dónde está la sociedad civil en las discusiones, las conversaciones, la política y la gestión. So I think asking the critical questions is, next time we organize our events, our trainings, our policy events, where is the representation of the civil society and who's defining that? And are they being represented across the lifespan? So we need to make sure that we have spaces where they're included, they're represented, and there's parity involved. Otherwise, it's after the fact. I think the children and the youth are critical to these conversations. I want to see them engaged, involved in the formulation of policies, of research agendas, of educational programs and interventions. And I think that's where, Guadalupe, you were highlighting the excellent example of how youth are being truly engaged and involved in changing the narrative and the conversation in the way that programs are driven. Let me just mention two more things in areas where I see us moving in the right direction. Look at how these communities have come together to address issues like tuberculosis. We see an issue, we see the threat. Yes, we understand security, but then we get our act together and we figure out a way to treat, cure. We understand, okay, the liabilities and the responsibilities that are impacted. I want to see more work, like the examples of what has been done in the areas of tuberculosis around the other issues of chronic disease, substance abuse prevention, engagement of youth, and really the mitigation of intimate partner violence, which is a very significant reality that we haven't really tackled as much. And then I want to sort of like leave us with another thought. There are models already in this community about how we address vulnerability, substance abuse, homelessness, and the rights of refugees and others. So let us look at those examples. And I want to see the media much more engaged. I want to aplaudir, Señor Moore, because I think that through your leadership and the El Paso Times and the leadership of the other mechanisms of press, we can do a better job of addressing the stories that really get at solutions. I think our narrative and our framing is really important. And I really encourage us to change some of the framing of our rhetoric and our questions so that we can truly get beyond the conversation about the demography, the security, and the threat, so that we can really help to connect the border to the rest of the world. And I think that's a critical piece. We're part of a world and that merits prosperity, where we want individuals to live free of fear and danger, where we want every single human being, regardless of what background you have, to have the same rights and privileges that we all strive for. That's the kind of region that I'm looking for. And I think that health is certainly one venue of how we can get at that conversation. And then let me just end by saying resources are definitely needed. Financial resources and investment, but before we can get to the financial resourcement, we need the political and the public will to tackle the issues of the root causes and to really be able to become uncomfortable and make the adequate investments and decisions and policies that are really going to help us advance. But those decisions need to be made by the people that are directly affected.
Here's a question for Lupita. Con Calderón, el problema era violencia. Ahora, ¿cuál es? La corrupción, la impunidad. ¿Qué hace con la juventud? ¿Qué se debe hacer con la juventud?
Yo creo que principalmente el que tengan una conciencia social, el hacer que nuestros jóvenes empiecen a luchar por sus propios ideales, empoderarlos, darles esas herramientas necesarias que aun a pesar de que pasamos por la situación, más de 10,000 personas tal vez en Ciudad Juárez, de que perdimos a un ser querido de la manera más violenta que puede existir, hoy hay que darle herramientas. Yo creo que las herramientas son necesarias para que esos jóvenes puedan hacer el cambio y la corrupción pueda terminarse en nuestro país. Son ellos los que tienen en sus manos el poder de cambiar nuestro país. Realmente y desafortunadamente seguimos teniendo ese tipo de problemas en nuestro país. Es palpable, se puede ver día con día, pero realmente es necesario que ellos se documenten, que ellos empiecen a tomar sus propias decisiones. Hay que despertar a nuestra juventud. Eso es lo que es necesario hacer en ambos lados de la frontera. Ellos tienen que empezar a tomar decisiones, decir, ahora soy yo el que quiero tener la palabra, soy yo el que quiero tomar la decisión y el rumbo de mi país. Nuestro país es un país de jóvenes, es un país joven aún, entonces requerimos que ellos empiecen a tener ese cambio de conciencia social, que realmente, como decimos en México, hay que tomar el toro por los cuernos, aunque a veces es muy difícil, porque es todo un sistema, y ese sistema hay que ir rompiendo esas cadenas poco a poco.
We just have a couple more minutes. This question is for Ruben and Fernando. What should be done, and this is from Julio Cesar Chavez, What should be done with the inequality built into the Unaccompanied Children Act? And we have a couple more questions, so maybe we can speed it up and then get to a couple more.
I think it's making reference to the fact that when an unaccompanied minor is detained, what country they are from ends up in a different way of the minor being treated. Central Americans are much more, they're going to be sent to youth detention facilities. They're going to, efforts will be made to reunify them with family in the United States, etc. Whereas if you are an unaccompanied minor from Mexico, there is a much greater probability that the minor will quickly be connected to the Mexican consulate and then the minor repatriated. We've actually had some instances where a family has fled because of fear and asked for asylum, and because they fled at the moment, they left behind a 12 or 13-year-old son who was visiting someone at that particular moment, and then that individual, that child, goes to the border and gets told by a CBP officer that minors cannot seek asylum, that you have to go back. I'm thinking right now of an individual that attempted 2 times before. I then went to Juarez, and then I walked over with him, and I accompanied him to ensure that CBP would in fact receive him. Eventually, he was reunited with his mom, who has now been able to achieve a documented status after several years of going through that. So, in short, Mexican unaccompanied minors should be treated the exact same way that all minors are treated. At the heart of the question is, before a decision is made about what happens to a minor, there needs to be an assessment of what it is that leads the minor to be in our country. We do that with Central Americans. We need to do that with minors from Mexico in the same way. And so that disparity needs to be rectified, and it needs to be applied across the spectrum in an equal way.
Fernando, we only have a couple of minutes, so instead of maybe answering that question, we can just do a quick sentence from each, a quick phrase. We have people from outside, hopefully policymakers from Mexico City and Washington, Austin, hopefully, and Chihuahua. What's in a phrase or so for all of you, the 4 of you, what's the takeaway that you want them to leave with?
Immigration reform. And I think that is the first one. But I think it is important to understand that the debate has changed the perspectives of immigration reform. I think if we want to push pieces of immigration reform, I think we need all efforts. I think not only in Washington, but also at the state level, local level, but also Mexico will be very important in the discussion. It was very troubling when I was talking to some Mexican officials a few months ago, and they were saying that the current policy is not to get involved in the current immigration debate in the United States. I think that is a mistake. I think Mexico should have pushed more. It should push more in terms of this discussion. Secondly, I think we're talking about children, families, workers already in the United States. I think immigration reform had to be able to address all of these different components, people that is coming, that will come in the future, and people that is already here. And finally, I think besides immigration reform, and almost separate from immigration reform, we need to have enforcement reform. I mean, how do we see enforcement structures in institutions, and what are the role in our society? It doesn't matter if it's in Ferguson, doesn't matter if it's in San Francisco or at the border. I mean, what kind of enforcement is the one that a country that's supposed to be democratic, embracing American values such as accountability, respect, and dignity and justice, how those values are going to be embedded in enforcement? When we're going to stop shooting at people, immigrants, or is either immigrants at the border or people in the interior? I mean, why enforcement should actually send people to the desert to die there. So I think the discussion of enforcement is going to be the discussion of the future.
Thank you. Real quick, and I mean a phrase because I think we're seconds away, Dr. Mike. What takeaway? Quick
Siete
sentence.
palabras, 7 words. Human security means economic, health, personal, political, food, environment, community, and human rights. So let the agenda be around humans, around place, person-centered, driven in prevention, and action-oriented.
Ruben?
That immigration reform is not securing the border.
Lupita?
Para mí es de suma importancia que el trabajo que está realizando la sociedad civil en Ciudad Juárez se replique en todo el país, porque como Ciudad Juárez hay muchos estados que en estos momentos están pasando por una situación difícil. A una servidora le gustaría que en otros lados del país, y no solamente de México, sino de Estados Unidos, decir sí se puede seguir moviendo las piernas, como lo decimos en el fútbol americano, si es posible levantarse del dolor, si es posible hacer algo por tu ciudad, aún a pesar de que hayas pasado por la situación tan difícil como la de perder un hijo. Gracias, de verdad, muchas gracias por este espacio.
Thank you very much. Thank you to the panelists, Bob Moore, Doctora Natalicio, Beto O'Rourke, and thank you. Welcome to the Ellis Island of the Southwest. Thank you.
Thank you, Alfredo. And please, one more round of applause for the panel. I think that was a fantastic discussion.